from where 100 years before Napoleon's navy threw down its challenge to the British. Another struggle in which Britain struggled for life or death against a continental dictator. German U-boats could now have easy access to the clear, deep blue water of the ocean. As soon as a U-boat left French coastal waters, it entered the shipping lanes that brought oil from Africa and the Middle East, that carried armies to Britain's overseas empire, over which flowed strategic materials without which the RAF could not fly. Sail a short distance further, and were found the ships bearing food from the Americas. Germany was poorly prepared to take advantage of this. The U-boat numbers initially only slowly grew. Churchill was to say after the war that the U-boat war was the war that truly terrified him. Not a war of flaring battles and glittering achievements, but a fight of statistics, diagrams, and curves that the public did not understand. A war where inspiring words and spirit could have no effect. With the fall of France, Britain and her empire stood completely alone against Hitler. The only weapon was belligerent defiance. Time and time again, Churchill made words into sharp weapons. Let us brace ourselves to our duties, and so bear ourselves that if the British Empire and its Commonwealth last for 1,000 years, men will still say this was their finest hour. If we fail, then the whole world, including the United States, will sink into the abyss of a new dark age, made more sinister and more protracted by the lights of perverted science. Britain could have no strategy other than survival. Churchill's hopes lay in involving America in the conflict. All over the south of England, invasion was awaited. Preparations were made. The famous Home Guard of those too old and too young for military service was recruited. It gave all a sense of involvement. With the passing of time, the measures of improvised weapons now seems comedic, the stuff of farce. From within the Home Guard, a highly secret elite of stay-behind saboteurs was given special training to work from secret hideouts. That an army of old men and boys were preparing to defend their homes against the might of the German army, the most modern in the world, using spears and antiques, is a measure of the desperate plight which faced the British people.
In the course of your duty, you may have the luck to come in contact with the enemy. If you do, one of your duties is to shoot when you see a sitter, and shoot to kill.
When, in later years, the Home Guard's German equivalent was called into real action, with the aged and children fighting experienced battle-hardened soldiers, there were to be no jokes, no comedy, simply a desperate tragedy. A general atmosphere of fear and tension pervaded the whole of Britain, with a feverish climate of paranoia. Both the physical and social structures of Britain were torn apart. Road signs were removed to confuse an invading enemy. Fields were filled with obstacles to hamper glider and airborne forces. Wild experiments were made to set the sea on fire. What became known as parachute fever everywhere created rumors of saboteurs and infiltrators. Wild stories of Germans in British uniforms circulated, often caused by misunderstood Polish and Czech soldiers. The classic myth was that of German paratroopers walking the British countryside disguised as nuns. The structure of the country was dismantled in an urgent need for scrap metal. Aluminum pots and pans were collected to make warplanes. Iron railings and fences were gathered to build battleships. These actions were as much a media move as a real search for the materials of war. There was a need to make the whole country feel that something was happening and that each and everyone could be involved. The physical signs of desperate paranoia were mirrored by changes to the political and social landscape of Britain. One of the first acts of Churchill's government was to make new laws that effectively abolished traditional British personal freedoms and the right to private property. Now anyone could be told to do any job, and property could be seized by the government and used for the war. The right to strike was abolished. New taxes at 100% were introduced to prevent war profiteers. The democracy had paradoxically assumed the garb of the totalitarian dictatorship that it sought to destroy. The fear of subversion meant those thought politically suspect were arrested and detained. Pre-war British fascist leader Oswald Mosley was imprisoned, his followers in the British Union of Fascists interned. As the British people lived lives of febrile panic and paranoia, the fact remained that a few miles away, the German armed forces were preparing to complete the war with the invasion of Britain. It is a fact of history that wars very rarely turn out as political leaders or generals ever imagine. The Blitzkrieg had brought the Nazis stunning success at a speed they had never thought possible. Hitler's view of the world had never encompassed taking on the might of the British Empire. From the earliest days of Hitler's political thought, he had seen his destiny, that of the Nazi movement and that of the German people, as lying in a titanic war in the East against Soviet communism. While Hitler may have sought humiliating revenge on the French, whom he viewed as the prime architects of Germany's interwar humiliation, against Britain and her empire, he had not planned a war. Now the German command was confronted with the need to plan an invasion of the British Isles. Looked at from the perspective of the longer history of Europe, Germany was now placed in a classic dilemma. A strong continental power, used to looking strategically inwards, to the east, fighting its wars across land frontiers, was faced with the challenge of defeating the preeminent naval power. The invasion of Britain was codenamed Operation Seelöwe, Operation Sea Lion. Germany was not an historically great naval power, and its attack on Britain was planned more as a river crossing. Landings would be made on the beaches of southern England, and the panzers would thrust northward. Today, we think of amphibious warfare as using special landing craft and vessels. This was far from the case in 1940. The fleet to carry the German army across the sea was an improvised armada of river barges and merchant ships. The German Navy was not large enough to engage the British in a powerful fleet-to-fleet battle. Britain was historically the dominating sea power of the world, and its powerful navy would easily subdue and destroy any fleet of clumsy inland craft moving across the Channel. For the first time, there was a way to solve the problem of British naval power. All navies in 1940 were vulnerable to air attack. It was aircraft, rather than the great guns of other battleships, that were to cause the losses of capital ships. The British command of the sea could be countered by the Germans having command of the air. However, to gain command of the air, the Germans had to destroy the RAF. In Churchill's words, "The Battle of France is over. The Battle of Britain has begun." Next time on World War II, The Complete History, the Battle of Britain rages in the skies over southern England, as Hitler's Luftwaffe throws its strength of more than 1,000 bombers against the fighters of the Royal Air Force. Its aim is total air supremacy over the British